The U.S. and the Taliban appear to be on the verge of signing a historic peace deal that could finally end the 18-year war. A temporary week-long truce is set to begin within hours. The agreement calls for a reduction of violence across Afghanistan. The U.S. and the Taliban are set to sign a historic peace deal a week from Saturday on February 29th, as long as the group holds back attacks. So for more on this, let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata. He's following the latest from London. So, Charlie, do we really expect the Taliban to hold to this reduction of violence truce when the U.S. has been demanding that for years?
Well, Vlad, that's the key question. And I think the hint is in the title there, the reduction of violence. Nobody's calling it a ceasefire. Nobody's calling it a truce because those things can be broken. Reduction of violence is more subjective. It's toning down some of the violence that we've seen. It's worth mentioning we are not in the so-called fighting season. It's the winter time in parts of Afghanistan, well, in all of Afghanistan, but that means that there's already a reduction in violence. But the Taliban are taking it seriously. They put out a WhatsApp message saying to all their sort of local commanders to tell their fighters that this means what it means. We need to stop this. There will be no fighting. There will be no roadside bombs. There won't be attacks on civilians. Certainly won't be attacks on U.S. troops. And this has to hold for a 7-day period. Can we trust the Taliban? Not sure. There are skeptics that say that this won't happen, that we can't trust them. Are there going to be spoilers? Will there be a moderate, tolerated level of violence, as sometimes happens during these times? The people that aren't part of this deal, that just want to be the spoilers, that will be taken into account. But they are taking it seriously. And there is reason to hope. I suppose this is one of probably the most hopeful period that we're headed into for one particular reason, because the Taliban want U.S. troops out of Afghanistan and President Trump wants U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. That's a good starting position, and we have never seen them get to this point before in the past, well, I don't know, 10, 15 years.
But, Charlie, as you know, having reported from Afghanistan on the ground over the years, the question, I guess, becomes what happens if the U.S. does indeed leave? Is that what the Afghan people want? Do they want to see the Taliban essentially unleashed, unguarded, without the U.S. presence there on the ground?
Yes. I've been going to Afghanistan since you were a boy.
I think we're the same age, though. But
well, maybe. But the Afghans, it's a key question. But what's significant about this, and the reason that people are hopeful, outside observers are hopeful now, is in the past, the Taliban have refused to engage in dialogue with the Afghan government. Even the peace talks that we've been seeing have been happening in Doha, and haven't even been happening in Afghanistan itself. And they've been happening between the Taliban and the United States. So the Afghan government has essentially been shut out of that process. What this will do, if this peace process holds for the next 7 days, and I call it a peace process, this reduction in violence holds for the next 7 days, then it starts intra-Afghan conversations and dialogue between the Taliban and the Afghan government. And significantly, the Afghan government say that they're pleased with the developments. So now that we've got the Afghan government on board, now we can start negotiating toward some sort of power-sharing agreement with the Taliban. As unsavory as that may sound to American ears after the amount of blood and treasure that's been spilt in that country, I think there's a sense that you cannot move forward without some sort of agreement with the Taliban on board. So this is just like the first chapter of it. If we can get past that first week, this reduction in violence, then it will trigger a signature. Then it will trigger these promises and pledges from the Taliban that they are going to engage in dialogue with the Afghan government, significantly that the Afghan government will be part of those talks. Now, can the Taliban be trusted? Well, the Taliban, there are many in the United States. I've been there myself so many times. In the past, they haven't really gained that trust. It's been said that you can't surge trust. Trust is something that's lost. They haven't really gained that. The Taliban, for their part, say we're not quite sure we can trust the United States to hold their promises. So Is it just going to be a period where they're behaving themselves in a manner of speaking, that they're going to allow women to continue to go to school or girls to continue to go to school, that they're going to have a sort of more moderate Taliban 2.0 approach than we have seen in the past? This is what we're going to have to see over the next weeks, months, years, I suppose. But they are in a position now, because of the control and influence they have within Afghanistan, that they can start pressing back and say, this is what we want. And they do. And this is important. The Taliban are from that area. They are. There's a reason that the Taliban had taken control of Afghanistan. They have tremendous support in certain areas in the south and in parts of the east. So any kind of agreement will be a power-sharing agreement, whether the Afghan government or the United States likes it or not.
And finally, Charlie, I want to ask you your perspective, having also embedded with American military forces in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, going back to when I was a young man. And I'm curious, because you're well aware that I interviewed the author of a recent book out on the Trump administration, A Very Stable Genius, Carol Leonig, and she recounts an incident where the President of the United States, Donald Trump, was railing against the military leadership in a briefing, along with other senior military officials. He called them losers for the war in Afghanistan. He said that they were dopes, said that he wouldn't go to war with these individuals. You talk about the blood and treasure that has been spent in almost 19 years there on the ground. How monumental would this be for the U.S. military? How would they feel about the cessation of activities in Afghanistan, coming home fully?
Well, I have to unpick that slightly, because if you speak to U.S. troops, as we have done and spent so much time with them, they're professionals. The United States should be very proud of the men and women who are working in these dangerous environments. They're there to do a job, and you'll continue to hear that. That's on camera, off camera. That's what they're there to do. They don't get involved in the politics of it all. However, having said that, we spent some time with Marines who had been down at sort of Helmand province, who've cleared these areas of Taliban fighters and lost comrades in some of the worst fighting that country has seen. Is it tough for them to be essentially surrendering this territory or having to go back in there? Of course, it's going to beat up your morale when you've lost, friends in battle in those areas. Looking ahead, there will be a contingency force there. The Taliban may or may not accept it, or they may not accept it publicly anyway, but certainly the United States wants to keep a counterterrorism force in there. The troop reductions will come down. It's a 135-day timetable for the reduction of troops from 13,000 to 8,600. But that still means that there will be a residual force, a contingency force there, because we have to remember the whole reason that the United States went there in the beginning was after 9/11, the Taliban was harboring al-Qaeda. And the United States will want, and the U.S. military, importantly, will want assurances that the Taliban will not allow safe haven for groups like ISIS or al-Qaeda, anybody that may threaten the West or United States interests. And they will have to come to some sort of agreement with with the presence of U.S. troops there. So that, when you talk about duty and when you talk about morale and you talk about the presence of mission, that is where we're going forward. They've been in a train, advise, assist position, trying to help out the Afghan government and the Afghan military in fighting the Taliban. That's absolutely going to be peeled back now. That's not their fight anymore. They will be there specifically in order to fight counterterrorism, surveillance, intelligence, all the things to make sure that there isn't a foothold within Afghanistan, regardless of what may happen. And there is talk that there could be fighting. There may be fighting, the breakout of a civil war. Not America's fight. America is there. American forces are there to guard U.S. interests.
All right. Charlie Daggett for us, reporting from London. Charlie, thank you as always.
Thanks, Vlad.